A haven on the green. This is the history of the Barnes Green Centre. This is the earliest illustration I can find of what we now know as the Barnes Green Centre. It is dated 1857. It also shows Elm Cottage on the right, which still exists. But the story of the site goes back much further, and we will come back to this painting later. There were 3 cottages on the green to begin with: Rose Cottage, Elm Cottage, and a third unnamed cottage. Elm and the unnamed cottage were owned by the Hoare family of merchant bankers, who lived for many years at Barn Elms. This is Sir Richard Hoare. The Hoare family owned large tracts of land, mainly in the west of Barnes. The tenants of the 2 cottages paid £15 a year in rent to the Hoare family. This is a drawing from about 1790. The early village clustered around the pond, the high street, and the church. The pond had been here for many centuries. And the church was originally built some 1,000 years ago. This is a watercolour of St Mary's in 1823. There are references to several schools in Barnes for both girls and boys in the 18th and 19th centuries. Some were tiny dame schools, and others were large establishments for the privileged few whose parents could afford the fees. There was, for example, Cleveland House Academy, founded in 1800, which was a school for young gentlemen and situated on the green where the old sorting office is now. And there were many other private schools in the villages, but few parents could afford the fees or forego their children's earnings or labour. However, a school on Barnes Green was founded in 1775 as a charity day and Sunday school. It was housed in the cottage very close to the current Barnes Green Centre. It was a school for 20 children, 10 boys and 10 girls. Some could have come from the Barnes workhouse, as well as from the very poor households in the village. In 1778, a large workhouse was built by Queen's Ride, near to what is now Roslyn Park Rugby Club, and well away from the village. The inmates were clothed and fed and kept to labour. It was very strict and very basic. The workhouse was funded by local subscriptions. In 1836, the Barnes workhouse closed, along with the workhouses of Mortlake and Kew, and they were incorporated into the Richmond Union of Workhouses in Grove Road. This is a photograph of the Richmond workhouse entrance. The building has now been developed for private housing. Like the workhouse, the school on the green was funded by subscriptions from the more affluent in Barnes, by endowments from wills, and from the proceeds of an annual sermon given in St Mary's. This was the means whereby all poor schools were run. It was long before central or local government had a role to play in education. The original Barnes Green School Cottage of 1775 was replaced 8 years later by the building now on this site. But it was a much smaller building than the current one, even though it was now open to all the village children. And this is the 1857 painting showing that building, which consisted of one schoolroom. The children were taught very basic subjects, and 20 of the poorest continued to be clothed by the subscribers. The clothes were handed back once the children left the school, or if they broke any school rules. These are workhouse boys. The school supplied better clothes. They had a pair of trousers, a black jacket, a round cap, 2 shirts, stockings, and 2 pairs of shoes. They had a Sunday suit with a bib, which had to be returned on Monday morning. The girls had a frock, grey stockings, low-heeled shoes, white caps, tippets, like a small shawl, blue mittens, and brown and grey capes. The fabrics used were very hard-wearing, a heavy serge or worsted, but they would have been warm, and shoes would have been so important. By 1818, the Barnes Green School had 60 pupils. All the children were taught in one room by one schoolmaster, John Roseblade. He taught at the school for over 30 years and died in December 1849, aged 77. He was paid £48 per year, plus coals and candles. He was described as an excitable man who could often be heard beating children with a cane in church when they misbehaved. After his death, Mrs. Roseblade was asked to take care of the school, and her son James was to be the schoolmaster. But there was a problem when it was announced that, in consequence of the gross misconduct of Mr. James Roseblade, he be forbidden to come upon the premises of the school. It is now early 1850, and a new schoolmaster, Mr. Alsop, is employed to teach the children. The school numbers continued to grow, as the population of Barnes also grew. The school roll was now 102. By this time, the building had been bought from the Hall family, and plans were made to expand the building. It was also at this time that school rules were put in writing, and the school became the Barnes National and Infant School. National schools were voluntary establishments run on behalf of the Church of England. Infants from the ages of 2 to 7 paid 2 pennies a week. At 7, they paid 1 penny. Attendance was from 8:50 in the morning until 12 noon, then from 2 until 4 o'clock in winter, and 5 in the summer. Any child having a dirty face, uncombed or dirty hair, or uncleaned clothes would be sent home, along with those who had arrived late. The children had 3 weeks' holiday at Christmas and another 3 weeks in June. Parents were also expected to keep their children from bad company and to make sure they were off the streets after dark. So this is the school as it was when Mr. Roseblade and Mr. Alsop taught there. The porch and the 2 windows leading to what is now the lounge. The main entrance is therefore on the side of today's building, and the path leads to the church. Elm Cottage is easily recognizable, but if you look carefully in the center of the picture and behind the small tree, there appears to be another building. Could this have been the schoolhouse where the Roseblades lived, and possibly the small unnamed cottage which housed the original school? It would make sense, but I can find no records to prove it. This modern photo shows the side of the current building, and like the watercolour, with its porch and 2 windows. Around the time of the 1857 watercolour, it was decided that the school must expand, and some extra land was acquired. A new separate room and entrance was then built for the boys. This photograph shows the new porch and the boys' entrance, leading to their schoolroom. This porch is today's main entrance. Girls' and boys' schoolrooms were joined by a glass-covered corridor at the back. And with this new extension, gas was installed for lighting, along with a cesspool and drain. The extension also included a 2-story addition to accommodate the schoolmaster and his family. And this is that second floor plan with 2 rooms for the schoolmaster. And this is what it looked like from the outside. The boys' entrance porch and their schoolroom on the left, the schoolmaster's accommodation on the upper floor, with the girls and infants on the right. There are no big windows to the front. With the expanded school came a new schoolmaster, Mr. Stevens, who was appointed to teach the boys, and a schoolmistress was to teach the girls and infants. Stevens had a large family and lived in the rooms over the school. He also made changes to the school. He obtained a piano, and with no expense spared, he installed for £5 a roller towel for the boys' room. Children could now stay at school until the age of 12. Religion would have been the dominant subject taught to all the children. But the boys were also taught reading, writing, arithmetic, drawing, and some basic history and geography. Girls, however, were only taught reading, writing, needlework, and darning. The behaviour of the girls was seen to be of much more importance than learning. The school roll continued to grow. By 1865, there were 60 boys in the new classroom and 116 girls and infants in the second classroom. It was decided that a curtain was needed to divide the infants from the older girls, and this curtain cost £7 and 10 shillings. The rector of Barnes, Henry Melville, was concerned that the school was still too small for the number of pupils. So it was decided that new premises were needed. The area of Westfields was being built on, and so a new school and a schoolhouse was planned there at the junction of Cross Street and Archway Street. In April 1870, boys from the Barnes National School were sent to the new school in Westfields, which could accommodate 100 boys. But there were still 120 girls and infants at Barnes Green. The Elementary Education Act of 1870 established that all children had the right to some form of schooling and that those whose parents could not afford the fees were to be educated free of charge. The schools could receive a grant to cover these fees, but it also meant that the school inspector could check on the children's progress. This is a photograph of some of the girls at Barnes Green in about 1890 with the schoolmistress. The early inspector's reports were not encouraging, and standards were not high. The inspector noted towards the end of the 19th century that for the girls at the Green School, spelling was weak, reading inarticulate, and grammar non-existent. Hardly any darning was being done, and there was far too much chatting, lounging, and inattention. And all the 124 girls and infants were being taught by one teacher and two pupil teachers. The babies are reported to be learning nothing and were in great confusion. The fireplace needed a guard, and the embroidery was remarkably filthy. The inspector recommended that drinking water would be a good idea. Facilities were very basic. And we must remember that the teachers had few aids at their disposal with which to stimulate the pupils' imagination or enthusiasm for schoolwork. The pupils were generally from economically poor homes, where food, clothing, coal, and rent were in very short supply. Infectious diseases were commonplace, with little medication to ease symptoms. Outbreaks of mumps, influenza, whooping cough, measles, ringworm, impetigo, chicken and diphtheria were common, and the school would frequently be closed for disinfecting. Children often had head lice, and any diseases would spread like wildfire in the overcrowded classrooms. Attendance was often low. Older girls would often stay at home to look after younger siblings. Some went hop picking in Kent in the summer, or worked locally in the market gardens. This obviously helped with the problem of overcrowding, but was not the ideal solution. Things did not improve much over the years. The terrible overcrowding continued, along with the constant noise and general mayhem in the schoolrooms. And in 1900, the inspector reported that the unseemly writing on the lavatory wall must cease. In 1899, there were at Barnes Green 159 girls, with one mistress, two assistants, and a pupil teacher. There were also 131 infants, with one mistress, one assistant, and another pupil teacher. That's 290 children in all. A plan to extend the school again was put forward later that year. And this is the 1900 plan. You can see the outline in black of the original 1850s building. The infant schoolroom, the girls' schoolroom, and all the exterior walls. It was an H-shaped building. The red lines are the new walls. The main hall did not exist. Here you can see the old walls. If you walk around the building today, the exterior walls can be followed from the plan. These walls were therefore from the 1850s and 60s. Once the 1900 extension had been completed, the basic shape of the building was now what it is today. The two big windows were added to give light to the large hall, and it was designed to accommodate 197 girls and 112 infants in 4 rooms. This photograph shows the early 20th century building with its new windows. And this is the current floor plan showing the large hall with additional offices and toilets that exist today. And this is a more modern photograph of what is now the front of the building. But all that extra work was short-lived, as towards the end of the 1920s, the school closed. The girls and infants were moved to the Westfields Girls and Infant Schools, which had been built in 1880, as well as the Castle Now School in St Hilda's Road, which had opened in 1883. And this is a photo of an infants class in Mortlake's National Schools in 1926, the same year that the Barnes School closed. Barnes building was now threatened with demolition. Luckily, it was saved. A number of day and evening adult education classes were held there in the 1920s, but I can find no reference to the building during the 1930s. During the Second World War, however, it was occupied by the Civil Defence Service, run by the Borough of Barnes Air Raid Precautions Committee, led by retired squadron leader Lurwell. This was an ARP post. After the war, the building became a halfway house for local homeless families, but the building was deemed unsuitable as it had no inside toilets. Mr. Fred Redgwick was the caretaker living on the upper floor that had once housed the schoolmaster. The council eventually decided to keep the old school and to convert it into a day centre for the elderly. The building needed a lot of work to bring it up to modern standards, at a cost of some £16,000. Meanwhile, the WRVS had been using the kitchen to provide Meals on Wheels for local residents. And then, in a packed hall on Friday the 24th of April 1970, the Barnes Green Day Centre was opened by His Worship the Mayor. The building was well equipped and furnished. The main hall had space for 60 persons seated for lunch and a room for 200 for other activities. There was also a quiet room, the original schoolroom. This is a local press report of the opening of the centre in April 1970. And this is a 1971 photograph showing the Barnes Old People's Welfare Committee bus with the Mayor and Mayoress. And this is a photograph of the WRVS car in 1972. The WRVS now had to cater for an extra 60 lunches as well as their usual meals, and they took on the running of the centre. But the centre continued to develop. In March 1979, a plan was put in place to set up a crafts and hobbies advisory centre for local retired people. And this was how the centre continued for the next 20 years. Fish had been founded in the dreadful winter of 1963. Then in the year 2000, the two fish organisations which had separately served Mortlake and Sheen and Barnes, were amalgamated. A year later, Janie Hughes was appointed coordinator. Following a review of older people's care in the borough, a pledge was made by Richmond Council in 2004 that the Barnes Green Centre would be managed by the voluntary sector with the council's financial support. Age UK would run the centre as a community resource, and Fish would have the upper floor, the schoolmaster's lodgings, from where they would provide a range of voluntary services. So this is where we are today. Activities run by Fish include outings on the Fish bus, singing sessions, and so much more, including, of course, Tuesday talks. I called this talk A Haven on the Green, and this building has certainly been a haven in Barnes for some 250 years. It was a haven for the pauper children from the workhouse. It was a haven as a school for hundreds of poor boys, girls, and infants, giving them a respite from the hardships at home. Then it acted as a place of refuge for the men and women of the ARP during the last war, and it later housed families who had been made homeless. And since 1970, the Barnes Green Centre has opened its doors as a social and well-being centre, offering lunches, companionship and warmth to the residents of Barnes, Mortlake and East Sheen. A remarkable history.